Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to Turning the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology, and I often try to get people on who have been influential in the world of astrology to give us their wise insight and sort of historical perspective on how we got here and where we're going. But one of the interesting things about my guest today is that he is the pioneer of what we call computer software that deals with astrology. He's the first person who invented who brought the astrology to the computer. A very, very vital person, because it certainly changed the way astrology has been put out to the public in many ways, and has changed the way we approach astrology. It's brought it to a much wider platform than ever before. His name is Michael Erlewine, and he is the founder of, among other things, Matrix Software. And he's great honor to have you on as a guest today, Michael. I'm so pleased that you're able to join me today to talk about this.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so give us some history about, the computer and astrology are a match made in heaven, but someone had to take that step, and you were quite bold in doing this back in the days when the early stages of computers and design. What prompted you to do this?
Well, I think we have to look at a little bit of history, and that we have to remember that it wasn't until 1972 that 4-function calculators were even available.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, there were like more sophisticated scientific calculators, and then programmable calculators, and then 1977 we had home computers. Excuse me a second. So nothing was even possible. Before that, the only kind of astrology that could be done would be on mainframe computers, and so that's right. A lot of money and expensive programmers, and I did some of that actually. But I was, before that, what we astrologers did was we had to use log tables, look up ephemerides, and everything was done by pencil and paper and, various kind of tables, so that there was nothing special in it. It was just a very tedious process.
I know, I've done it. It's very tedious.
and so at some point what happened to me is I was not then a computer programmer or anything. In fact, stuff like computers and math were my worst topics, worst subjects. It's just that I had things that that I did not understand about astrology that I couldn't do on pencil and paper, and I did some of that. I did my first book. I did a book in 1975, which is 2 years before computers. There was a 400-year heliocentric ephemeris called "The Sun is Shining," and that was all done on a calculator. And I did a series of 7 star maps, very large star maps for astrologers, where I translated all the stars that astronomers use, the positions, into astrological notation of zodiac signs and minutes and seconds. And that was all just done on a little calculator. And so it took an enormous amount of time. And then I reached a point where I discovered a technique for myself that's now used in almost all computer software for astrologers. It's called local space. It's the space surrounding us, and it's mostly used by astrologers today for relocation. But it would take me an entire day doing the trigonometry for it, using trig tables to do a single chart. And so I just thought that wasn't too cool. And so then I started to see, what can I do about it? Then when home computers first came out, I was very excited, and I got one of the first home computers. It was called the Commodore PET 2000.
I remember, yeah.
And 1977, I programmed an entire astrology program to within a couple of minutes of arc of all the planets and moon, plus different coordinate systems in 8K of RAM.
Wow,
I think
unbelievable.
we use 8K today just to press a single button on our keyboard.
Mm-hmm. It's
So that
incredible how
idea.
it's changed. Yeah, it's incredible how it's changed.
So you can ask some more questions.
Yeah. Well, no, it's interesting. I mean, I think that, I mean, I'm wondering, when you think about the introduction of a outside force, such as a computer, being brought into the world of astrology, it saves all of us enormous amounts of time, and that for which we are eternally grateful. But what does it do to the sort of the generic approach of astrology? Do you think that it solves that problem? You may be biased in this regard, but you are getting a sort of a generic interpretation that doesn't have quite the same amount of authenticity as you would get from a human being. Ideally, the way I do it is I look at the charts and I come to my own conclusions based on my own knowledge of astrology. But I'm worried about the baked-in sort of interpretations, and how do you address that topic?
Well, first of all, you're leapfrogging from the introduction of astrology on computers to what you're calling, interpretations.
Mm-hmm.
And to begin with, they didn't exist.
Right.
That it was what we first tried to do was to reduce the calculations from this stuff that took a long, long time down to something that took a couple of seconds. So,
right.
And it was years later. I mean, years later, before we started to offer astrological software. When I first did astrology, I wasn't the first person ever to try to program astrology on a computer. I was the first person to ever program astrology and make it available to the astrological community. And when I did, at the beginning, I would have to, if I gave it to anyone for free that wanted it. And I actually back then we didn't have disk drives. We had to record it on tape cassette, just audio tape, and then verify it. Mm-hmm. So pretty soon I was spending all day long just recording tapes, verifying them, and sending them off to people. And so that I also had a family, with kids. And it was very difficult. So at some point I decided I had to start charging. And just interesting, there was a very famous astrologer that I won't mention, the name of, who wrote me a letter. I hope I still have it somewhere. I can't remember. But I've given most of my stuff to the university library, so I don't know where it would even be. But what he said is that you don't have any right to sell your cassettes to anyone for more than the price of the cassette and mailing.
Wow.
Well, it just showed how. Also, I think he's a very money-oriented guy. Mm-hmm. And I think what he was really saying is, the subtext was, I didn't get in on this. I don't know anything about this. How can you be making money and I'm not?
Right, right.
And so, but now I'm sure he'd be really embarrassed. But no, I did give stuff away for free for a long time, and then I began to charge what I had to live. I had a little come to Jesus moment where I had to say to myself, well, Michael, you're doing this programming in order to do the astrology that you always wanted to do in your head. But here you have a fork in the road. You can either continue to do that and just tell people, no, I'm not giving you my programs, or you can start a business where you can still do your stuff as much as, but not totally, and you can make your programs available to people and charge for them and make a living. So I chose to make a living for my family, but I still did a lot of research.
Right, and the amount of work that had to go into the initial, computation of establishing this program must have been hours and hours and hours of time and energy to put in. You can't expect that to be given away for free. I just don't see how that could possibly happen.
No, but they did, and then to address what you addressed a little while ago about interpretations, when interpretations came out, and what we mean by that would be an astrology program that would print out on paper a little written interpretation of your chart, and when that happened, many astrologers, and I won't name names again, but I certainly could, were very upset that astrology would threaten them. They were all interpreters. They were all people. You needed them to tell you what your astrology means. And if you could get it on a little piece of paper for $5 instead of spending $100 to go and sit down with an astrologer, that was a huge threat. But there's a caveat to that. These same people that derided, put it down, came to us under the counter and bought the program that did computer interpretation so that they could sell someone that would not pay them $50 or $100, $5 worth of astrology. And but after a while it became okay to have interpretation. But your question was, how do these things differ? What's the difference between a computer-generated report and a personal report, but just done by an astrologer, if I get you right? Is that right? Is that your question?
Well, it's sort of like, it does pose an ethical question. I mean,
what's the ethic? I don't see any ethics there. What's the ethical?
Well, I mean, if you're relying, I mean, if the computer program is written by an astrologer, as it was, such as yourself, and
right.
your interpretations are on spot on the money, which I'm sure they are, and I've seen there evidence of that, then people would say, well, why don't I just go out and buy the program myself? Why do I need a human being involved in this?
Well, they did, but this is not the first time that media and stuff like that has looked at the internet. And
I know, yeah.
Pick up your iPhone. I mean, what is that? So this is just time marching on, and so that there's no reason. Certainly, most of the computer-generated reports in the beginning were pretty bad. Mm-hmm. But it was only a lack of technique. It was like they weren't done well. They weren't illustrated. They weren't. There was too much. You get 20 or 30 pages of stuff, and who in the world has time to read through 20, 30 pages? We all did, but that's not so true anymore. I feel that, and I've written a lot of reports, that I can put most of what I would do if I sat down with you one-to-one into a report. No, it's not quite as good, but you don't want to pay me $300 to do it either, and you can get it for $10 or $15. Would you get the main guidelines that I would tell you about your chart from in my company, which I don't own anymore, get anything out of, is called Matrix Software, and they have lots of my reports where you'd get exactly what I would tell you, except that if I were with you and we sat down and had a cup of coffee, then we would do what we're doing here, talk back and forth, and I would try to zero in on just exactly how I could help you in any way. What could I point out to you that would be useful? So that you're absolutely right. I don't see any ethics involved. I just see...
Well, it's not as nuance, I guess is the word I want. Nuance.
Yeah, nuances. Sure. You would have to travel to where I am. I live in a little town in Michigan, and I don't even do these anymore, right. Except for I do them all the time. But for kids, family, extended family, people come through town, that kind of stuff, just because then I don't charge any money. Mm-hmm. But I did when I had to make a living doing it.
Of course.
So, of course. But, the chances of you getting here, I live on the edge of a 900,000 acre forest. You're getting here is not likely. But so it's much easier for most of you to get a report I did, read that. Then if it knocks you out, then you might want to make a pilgrimage here, make a joke. Right. And we sit down one-to-one, and I'd be glad to help you. Mm-hmm. But I says, I'm really not doing it anymore, but I am doing it a lot anyway, just because you need to help people.
Right. No, I think that's very admirable of you and very noble of you to do that. I guess the question comes from the point of view of someone who's not a trained astrologer, who's not gone through the work of astrology and all the the permutations that arise from it. They arrive at a program and are able to put in a couple of birth coordinates, and all of a sudden they've got an accurate picture. Does that remove the talent from someone such as yourself, who has wisdom beyond belief of years of studying astrology?
Not so much. I think that it removes some money from my pocket if I wanted to try to capitalize on all the work that I've done. But I think that it helps astrology to get better stuff to more people, because almost anyone can afford $10 or $15 worth of astrology. Then they could find out, do they really... To me, astrology is not something you believe in. It's something that's either useful or it's not. It's a language, and if it's a language you like to listen to, and it points something out to you, then it's good. So I think if the reports are decent, I think it's great that you can get $10 worth of astrology.
Right. No, I guess the reason is because people often wonder, the accuracy if you're getting it from a person versus from a computer. I see to your point, because you're in a professional astrologer, you wrote the interpretations, so we know they're right. And any two software programs, in essence, even if they're different, written by different people, should come up with the same conclusion.
Not true. I don't think that's true. I mean, I think that you might get in the same ballpark, but I think there's all the difference in the world between what one astrologer says and another. It can be.
I would agree, but I'm saying if you run two different programs and you bring up an aspect and you look at the aspect and two people describe it differently, ultimately, I mean, the theory, I guess, comes down to this. If you put 5 astrologers in the room and gave them each the same chart, their basic premise of what the person that they're interviewing are looking at should be relatively the same. It should be close because you're working with a formulaic process through which you come up with a interpretation of the individual. Granted, nuance and interpretation and words that you use might be different, but ultimately you should come down with a certain characteristic that is portrayed by the placement of the planets, right?
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what could be done. First of all, let's talk about what is astrology. Basically, first of all, lots of stuff is called astrology that's also some kind of psychism or psychic this and that. Astrology literally is what is cultural astronomy. The only thing the astrologers agree on is the actual aspects. So like if we say it's going to be a new moon eclipse on tomorrow at 1 o'clock or something like that, that is the astronomy of it, and all of us have to agree on astronomy because that is the only thing that astrology is about, is trying to tell you what does this astronomy mean to us. Mm-hmm. But if I put and I just came back from Chicago a month ago where I did, what did I do? 24 video audio things like you're doing here and 120 sit-down readings with people. I find that each of these people needed a different kind of thing. And also I talked to a lot of astrologers. Most of these were astrologers. They're just so different. You just have, yeah, they could agree that we're going to have an eclipse, but what is an eclipse? And what does this eclipse mean to you? And you're not going to you'll get in the ballpark. I mean, I would agree with you. We're all going to generally be talking about eclipses, but who knows what an eclipse means? I find that a lot of astrologists don't even know
the significance of an eclipse and how it plays out in the chart.
Oops, I got to get rid of this. Hang on.
All right. Well, the idea, I guess, would be.
Hello.
We're in the middle of a conversation.
Yeah, what's up?
Okay. All right.
What you want me to do with it?
I guess we're going to keep it.
All right. Okay, I'll talk to you then. I'm on an interview. Okay, see you. Bye.
Well, like you mentioned, the idea of an eclipse. I mean, we should have, part of studying astrology gives us a basic premise of what an eclipse is and what the impact is and how it should play out in our lives or its meaning.
Granted, well, it gives it to, astronomically, we can define it, right?
Right, yeah.
But if you've actually studied what people say about eclipses, that it's a wide range of interpretations. I mean, I think that's the part of astrology that's not all that defined. There's another way to say it is when it comes to interpreting, that's where astrologers differ, and it's also where they find their differences between one another. And I find the differences pretty wide.
Are you talking about like between Vedic and Western or that?
No. Those
people, yeah.
Yeah, I know Vedic and I know Chinese and I know Tibetan and astrologies. I'm not talking about those. Within any given one of them, and let's take Western, which is where the one most of us are in, there isn't that much agreement. Astrologers, like all other people, are at different levels of personal self-development. Their amount of awareness may be great or it may not be great, or they may be concentrating on physical aspects, or they may be concentrating on psychological or spiritual aspects. And so there's many kinds of astrologers.
Right. But the idea when you're talking about astrology, if a person walks up to you and gives you their birth coordinates, you're going to have a very quick idea of who they are, especially when you run the chart, and you'll be able to come across quite knowledgeable about what you're seeing with them. I think that those basic ideas we all adhere to sort of as the rules of the road, don't we? We sort of say this aspect means this. We sort of all adhere to that. How that may be interpreted or relayed back to the person may vary based on the individual's style, correct? Like you have your style, I have my style, other people have their styles. But we do, and I think astrology really is a combination of stories, and so how you tell those stories based on what we see in the chart is how I interpret a chart, at least. But that we're still going to be in the same ballpark. Well, we're still going to know which house we're in, for example, right? So
if we even use houses.
Well, that's true. Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't use them anymore. I know how to use them as well as anyone, but. So I'm not trying to argue with you.
No,
but,
I know.
But you're trying to find out what I think.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm on here. And so
Right.
I'm trying to tell you what I think, which doesn't quite agree with what you're trying to say that we all do. I do agree, and I did say we're somewhere in the same ballpark.
Right.
But getting from the ballpark to latching on to the actual meaning, to me, is a very wide, is a whole different thing. I just had a good look at lots of astrologers, and they're so different in what they focus on. They're so different in personal development, and they're so different in spiritual development. I just think that the area that astrology needs to work on I agree with you that what we need is exactly what you said. We need to get a state of astrology so that, just like you would with the doctor, if you go into a doctor and you have a meniscus out on your knee or something, they're all going to come up with roughly the same thing, but that's not true of astrology.
Right. And so you think that would be an area where astrology could evolve further, where we had a sort of a standard set of, well, that's the idea. I mean, that's what astrology schools are all about. That's what people going to, study astrology is all about. I agree with you. There's lots of different interpretations.
But that hasn't happened, in the sense that, let me just take a brief sidebar just to try to talk about this, that 400 years ago, a little longer than that, Copernicus pointed out that everything does not revolve around the Earth. It's not all about us. Mm-hmm. He said that actually the Earth orbits the sun. The Earth revolves around the sun. And at that point, or sometime soon thereafter, astrologers kind of split into two groups. There was one group that accepted the idea that the Earth goes around the sun. That's called heliocentric astrology. And so they walked away from that split with two charts, the traditional one, geocentric astrology, but also this new chart called heliocentric. But the astrologers were very, very stubborn. They never accepted heliocentric charting, and even now they kind of give it lip service, but they don't know what it means. And astronomers have gone on to become, but I think the two oldest academic disciplines are botany and astrology in universities. I mean, astronomy. They make a good living, astrologers, and I just saw it, struggling to survive.
You saw astrologers struggling to survive.
Well, yes, I have for 50 years.
Right. And of course, you didn't have that problem because you created the program, which got everybody talking about this. I mean,
I could make money with the program, right? I did.
Yeah. And you sort of, I think in many ways, you totally revolutionized the business. Like you said before, everybody was doing charts by hand. Now all of a sudden we cut all that time out, made the information far more accessible. That's a major accomplishment for anybody to come across, and to be that pioneer is something you should be quite proud of. I'm sure you are. But it opened the door to a wide range of people, perhaps getting into astrology, who maybe would not have gone through the work prior to. You see my point?
No, I do see your point. Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
But the question is, so it's like, what have you done for me lately, kind of thing. So now we have the technique of it done. We can generate very, very sophisticated astrological techniques, but we haven't evolved that much in what it all means.
Well, yeah, that's where the big crux comes in. I mean, how do we legitimize it? How do we validate it? We still, astrology is still in that realm of, but I think realm of being sort of unvalidated. Many people will say that it's not validated, even though you and I perhaps may think differently. That's a good question. I mean, where do you think this will go? How will we get validation?
Here's what I think is that, and I started to try to point at it when I talked about that there was a split 400 years ago or so, and astronomers made the right choice, but astrologers didn't. They went on thinking that everything was about us, everything revolved around the Earth, including the sun, and it doesn't. And what we're missing now is that the future doesn't belong to more and more evolved astrological techniques. The future depends on it's like, I'm trying to find a better way to put it. It's like we think of the mind, our mind. We learn to use the mind to do things like calculate charts or calculate trigonometry or study this. But we never, at least here in the West, we don't know anything about what the mind is in itself. We don't look at the mind directly. We learn to use the mind like a black box. We don't know how it works, but if we point it towards learning this, we can learn this. We point it towards learning that. But the problem with astrology today is that astrologers would have to become more aware. What they haven't spent a lot of time on is developing an awareness of mind that would be able to take advantage of natural intuition so that they could be, as the psychics say, on their contacts, so that they're connected enough so that they can interpret properly. A lot of astrologers, to me, shouldn't be practicing because they're not aware enough to help other people because they can't even help themselves to make, like, I can give you an example. I had many conferences here at our center, I think 36 or more different ones, and one of them was on financial astrology. Mm-hmm. And this wasn't just for a lot of people to come, this was just for the astrologers to come, and maybe 20 or 30 people would come to watch. But I invited 22 of the best known financial astrologers in the world. And I won't name them because I'm going to say something that's not too complimentary. But they were the very best. And many of them, and you would think that someone who knew how to use astrology to make money, the first thing that they would do would be to make money.
Right.
And these guys didn't. Instead, they would call me and write me and email me under the counter, but back channel saying, gee, I can't afford to get there. Everyone was supposed to get there on their own steam. So I had to wire them money to take a bus or take a train because they couldn't even make enough money to get train fare or bus fare.
That in itself is a problem because if you're in a financial astrologer, you should be rolling in dough.
Well, you would think, but the point is that, I think I knew one guy that had one donor. I mean, one client that paid him $50,000 a year. Well, that could be good, but most of them just didn't, and they were wonderful people, but they weren't able to make enough money to live comfortably themselves. And I was hoping to actually learn something, right? So, because I would like to make some more money. Right. But I didn't. All I learned is that these guys can't even make money. So that just tells me something. I mean, what does that tell you? I
know what tells me a lot. It tells me that they're not following their own credo. They're not listening to their own advice. They're not finding what they need to find in the astrology. They're not using astrology to find what they need, which is money.
But they were charging other people how to invest their money.
Right. No, I know that's troublesome, and I wonder if there was a return, guarantee on that. The same thing would be true for medical astrology. I mean, that's a very difficult.
That's something I have stayed out of.
Yeah,
it's because that you're going to end up in court. Mm-hmm. And I don't know much medical astrology. I've known some very fine medical astrologers, wonderful people, but I don't know anything about medical astrology either. So.
Right. I think that's and the idea there, of course, is that you could plant the idea in somebody's head, and then next thing you know, it's manifested, and then you've actually created a problem as opposed to avoiding. I understand that. Yeah, the thing about the financial astrology is an interesting vignette because it does point to the idea that you should be able to practice what you preach, and you should be the manifestation of what your practice is. And if you can't make money, you're a financial astrologer. That's just like going to any financial advisor. If the financial advisor is operating out of the back of a car as opposed to a nice, luxurious office, you must have to ask yourself what kind of a financial advisor they are.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, so it comes down to that. But, when you think about so when you come to the point where you've got this astrology and you've got people who, and they take the interpretation of it in a modern day astrology program. You're going to get all your aspects lined up, and you're going to be a written interpretation of what that aspect means. And that should be, generally, I should say, of course, there's going to be lots of room for nuance in there based on the individual and the interpreter. But ultimately, do you think that theme, that concept, that nugget of information is accurate? I know we're speaking in very broad terms, but
I'm still getting back to the same point. I'll make it another way. Mm-hmm. For instance, most astrologers, let's say that they use what are called aspects, as you know well.
Right.
And so they may have, let's say they have a square aspect. To them, a square is a square is a square. But the truth is that there's an applying square and a separating square.
Right.
We're talking about, when we talk about squares, we're talking about cycles. Mm-hmm. We're talking about a synodic cycle of, for instance, the sun and the moon or whatever the planet is, so that it's either building, so is it the square before the full moon, in which that might be a good time to start planning a party, but the square after the full moon certainly wouldn't, because you're headed toward the new moon, but what they call the devil's days, the 3 days before the new moon. So most astrologers don't discriminate, even today, between an applying and separating aspect. They know that what is applying and separating, but they don't interpret it.
Right. Well, it seems to me, that's a very good point, because and there's a different energy there completely, but the energy is there nonetheless. And I think that what happens is people acknowledge it, but they may not give it that much, granularity as you had, with you boil it down to be applying versus separating, and it's a much different thing.
But I think if you don't, you're missing. I don't know how you would advise someone.
Right. No, I think that's a very valid point. You make a really good point there. That it is, there's and you have to ask yourself how, depending upon which planet you're talking about. If it's a slow-moving planet, that's going to be a much more longer aspect that you're going to be dealing with. And I've even seen different situations or different interpretations of a square through different astrology programs that have not matched up sometimes, and that's always been concerning to me.
Yeah. So you'll find that what I'm trying to say here is not that a simple continued progress and development in looking for new and better techniques isn't where we need to put our money. What we need to do is develop our own ability to be aware, our own sensitivities, and our own, I've run a Buddhist meditation center for decades. And the way the Buddhists teach it is, at least in the tradition that I know, is that you don't try to help someone else until you can help yourself.
Right.
And if you can't, you shouldn't be trying to tell other people how to do things if you haven't solved it yourself. I mean,
I guess that's very valid. Yeah, I think that's very true.
So I think that what I do and what I have pretty much done for a long time is try to point out the value of actually learning to look at your own mind. Another example is that, let's just talk about modern astrology. One of the things I learned from going to Chicago, where there were, I guess, 1,500 astrologers.
Yeah, I was there. I remember, yeah.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
Did we talk? I can't remember.
No, we didn't. You were too busy. You were always busy.
I was pretty busy. But here we have these people, and a lot of the younger and brighter astrologers are involved in looking into ancient languages like Greek and Arabic, or Arabic's not ancient, but and Latin and stuff like that. And they're going back in time and studying the older, classical astrologers to try to find, I don't know what, let's just say they're trying to find wisdom or trying to find meaningful techniques or useful stuff. And what I think that's about is that the modern life that we're living in this media world, in the internet, of which I was a pioneer in, and our iPhones and iPads and all that stuff is so exciting, it's so revolutionary, that the sheer excitement in the air is suppressive, in a sense that it's like white noise, and we've suppressed our natural ability to intuit. And so we're no longer receiving from within ourselves the little fingers of intuition from which new ideas come. Remember that everything in the world, every last thought, word, and deed came from where? It came out of the mind. Mm-hmm. First it came from the mind, then it became manifest. I think that we've lost our contact. We're not in touch with our intuition as a group, and that as this interest in the internet and all this stuff slowly dies down, I think that we'll become more susceptible to being informed by our intuition again. I think things will, the way the Tibetans teach it is that you can learn to look in the mind itself. They have what are called terma, which are like, they call them mind treasures. Mm-hmm. The mind gave everything that we have. It's not empty. It's a cornucopia that's absolutely full today as it ever was, and that some of this energy by astrologers might be better spent learning to read the mind. And
what would that entail? Do you think that requires a deeper sense of psychology, or that's
no? I think it requires a couple things. That most of all, it requires some purification practices, mm-hmm. and purification practices mean learning to remove obscurations, learning to dull down what we could call the white noise of our life. So, so that we can better receive the signal instead of having it drowned out by the noise, right? So the signal-noise relationship is just not good right now. It's too excited. The whole society's all revved up. And I think that if you can calm the mind, which is allowing the mind to come to rest, then these little fingers of intuition, these little impulses come up from within ourselves. That's kind of like Atlantis arising. It's kind of, there's a whole world inside our mind that starts to come into view if we can see beyond ourselves just a little bit. That's what I think astrology needs, not something, not more technology, not more of this, not more of that, but more learning to look directly at your own mind and be satisfied in there instead of looking outside for satisfaction.
Right. Well, that's what meditation brings to the human beings. It gives us a sense of calm. And then I think what it forges then is it forges our sort of an antenna that allows us to pick up these signals. But we can't hear those signals now because we are way too distracted. There's too much signal to noise ratio, if you know about that.
Well, that's what I just said to you.
Yeah. And so as a result of that, I think you're absolutely right about that. And that it's that distractive factor that gets in the way of the interpretation, it gets in the way of the language, and gives us this false sense, and people run around thinking that that's the case. But the idea that we would, so to understand the mind, that is a self-discipline task, right? I mean, that's something that, and you think that if we meditate more on ourselves and hone our minds better, we would be more inclined to understand our intuitive process and be able to perhaps be a better astrologer. But that still means that somebody has to have a propensity towards astrology, has to have an interest in helping people with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's nothing but different ways of benefiting people. Astrology is just one of them. And, but I think that someone would have to learn to relax enough to allow the stuff that's within us to come to the surface. So like when I was a kid, I used to have this thing called the magic 8-ball. That you turn around and then an answer would slowly come up and into the top of the the little globe.
Yeah, I remember very well. Yeah.
And so I think it's like that. It's that we're not reading the natural stuff that's being fed to us from within ourselves. We're not able to. And you said it perfectly. That and Buddhism is all about. The word Buddha just means awareness. It's Bodhi, and it's. We're not aware. We're not allowing ourselves to be aware. And meditation, in this country, meditation means many things. It's one word. In Tibetan, they have dozens of words for meditation. When we mean meditation, some people mean like mostly relaxation therapy.
Right. But it's much different, yeah.
The Buddha did not teach that. The Buddha taught awareness, to become sharper and more aware until you become aware all the time.
And that can only happen in the here and now, in a state of meditation where your attention is totally focused on releasing the distraction. And that's what particularly hard. I think meditation is particularly hard in today's modern life because of the fact that we have so many distractions. I mean, how do we even accommodate that? Just Facebook alone, let alone the iPad and the phones and everything else. Just Facebook alone is an enormous time sink of energy going out that occupies space in our head. So I think of our head as kind of like a hard drive, and you need to flush it out sometimes. You need to get rid of the old data, and so you can start anew. We are sort of an accumulation of all this information. Now, do you think that we come to the planet preloaded with characteristics? I mean, that's what astrology would say. That's what astrology would support, that we come sort of preloaded, using the computer analogy of a software program. So we come wired in some way.
Well, that's an interesting way to put it. I don't see anything wrong with that way of putting it. The way I see it is the way that I understand it works is that everything that we do, every thought, word, and deed elicits a response from the universe. And in what's called Yogacara philosophy, it's a form of Buddhism, everything we do is dutifully recorded in what's called the alaya consciousness, or technically it's called the alaya vijnana. And what it means, or it's called commonly the storehouse consciousness. Our every action is kind of recorded like we're recording this conversation. And when we die, our persona, what we call Michael Erlewine, or our self, is left at the doorstep of death. It's disbanded. It's not carried through. We don't have what's called an eternal self or an eternal soul. But what we do have are all of these traces, karmic traces have been stored that go beyond our death, and out of which a new life is formed, a new persona. That there are urges and desires that we have that when we were born with new parents, in a new environment, those same urges then cause the just our physical self to create a new person. A new self is a new, completely new person is drawn around us. It's not related to the old person, other than the desires are the same. That's how the Buddhists look at it.
So that does imply a sort of a continuation. Like you are a product of your mother and father. You must have attributes that reflect both of them, correct?
Absolutely.
As am I. And so those are the characteristics I'm talking about. Sort of this coming, when I say preloaded, I don't mean preloaded, like I guess I do, but
I think that's a good term. I like that term.
Yeah. You sort of come, and so therefore we have, but you're saying it's not a personality. Personalities developed over time, but we do have these
personalities are like flowers. They bloom in each lifetime, totally different, and then they finish up and die in each lifetime. But the stuff that drives it, be like the roots and the stuff coming up from the soil, that goes from life to life. And in a new life, as you say, with new parents, new situation, new genes, those karmic traces, which are called vasanas, they draw around you a completely new personality, a completely new idea of a self.
Right. And everything would be, you'd have to be, everything would be based on time and place, because you're going to be a contemporary person with contemporary influences based on contemporary stimuli. So whatever's happening in the world in 2018 isn't going to be much different than it would have been 100 years ago or whatever. So we enter into that, and our personalities are formed around the context of the world in which we enter, correct?
Well, basically, our attachments, those things we like and dislike, they're the glue that hold ourselves together. So that when I was younger, maybe all I could think about was a new bicycle. And then when I got married, all I could think about is having a family. So what makes up our personality changes from day to day. But it's not the same. I'm no longer interested in having a bicycle, right? I mean, that's not what I think about. I think about whatever I think about, right?
Right.
So I think that's how people have to understand. So the point of saying that is there are a lot of what are called preliminary practices. All of them are purification based. What that means is that they help us to purify our consciousness and get rid of some of the stuff that obscures it. It's like clouds becoming in front of the sun. They help to move the clouds away so that the sun can shine through. And that's what meditation does, basically, is start to purify us so that we can be pure enough to feel our own natural, we can feel the moment itself. The moment itself is like the oxygen vent in the universe for us. There's nothing purer than this present moment. I mean,
right.
The way the Buddhists teach it is, and this is good. This is what I think astrologers should learn. One of the great traditions, they have what are called upadeshas, or they're called pith teachings. I mean, they're the essence of the essence of the essence. And one of the things, and there are what are called the 6 words of advice. And the first word, which is something we should all think about, is don't prolong the past. That's a Buddhist. Don't dwell in the past. It's not worth it. And the second one is don't invite the future.
Right.
Don't have expectations. And the third one, which is like profound, most profound, is don't alter the present.
Right.
Don't, leave it alone. Don't touch it. Let it be what it is, because that's what it is. And instead, learn to rest in the present moment just as it is. So these are the kinds of things that I believe astrologers need to learn before they're ever going to be able to make a good living.
Right. I mean, it has to be the case. I mean, that we really have nothing other than the present. We can't go back. We can't go forward. And
right.
and I think that being in the moment, the astrologer would be able to, at that moment in time, I guess they'd have this. The intuition would be real at that point in time. Would be a raw intuition that you'd be able to act on based on what you could see in the.
Well, that's right. If you remove there's nothing you have to do except remove the stuff that's blocking you.
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea.
And that's the idea. And that stuff, I mean, how would we, I mean, this is the age old question. How do we resolve that problem? How do we find, I guess it just comes with practice, is what you'd probably argue.
Well, there's so many different paths. The path that I follow that I'm interested in is it's a very short path that they say, where you actually work with a teacher. I work with a 95-year-old Tibetan. He doesn't even speak English. And I've worked with him for 35 years. Working with him closely, he's helped to point out to me and guide me toward how to get rid of some of the obscurations that make it so that I can't see very far, right, into the mind itself, so that I can begin to feel my own intuition, I have a sense of direction. It's like our inner compass is obscured. And if we don't remove the obscurations, we have no direction finder.
And it seems like a bit of a conundrum that we as human beings would have this as a problem. I mean, you'd think that we would come to the earth as a salient being, and a sentient being rather, and that we would be able to just, act this way. But I guess our mind is so complicated and so filled with wires, and I mean, metaphorically speaking, or just literally, filled with chatter that we can't seem to get to that spot. So we've got to work really hard to get to that quiet space and to be able to accept the present. Why do you think this is so difficult for us? I mean, you've been practicing for 20 years. Do you feel as if you've accomplished that process?
A lot more than 20 years. But I think that from what I pick up from what you're saying, from a Buddhist point of view, I see a flaw in it. And what it is that you seem to be saying what is called a Platonic approach, which means that, or the Christian approach, that once, what they call original sin, once we were pure, but now we're not. And the Buddhists don't say that. They say we have never been pure, and that we can become pure, but it's not like we've fallen away. It's not like we did something wrong and now we're obscured. They say, no, so my teacher said to me many years ago to a small group, he says, Michael, we're the stragglers. We're the ones who never got it. And all the time there's been, through all the lives we've lived up to now, we never got it.
Never got it because it was obscured.
It was just too opaque. We couldn't see beyond ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating understanding. But the idea that to get to that spot is a lot of work, and astrology does help provide that. It's sort of a leg up into your own personal insights. But you're still saying it's not so much the personality insights; it's more about calming the mind down so that we are able to serve as active antennas. Correct?
I'm sort of saying that if we're focused on astrology technique as a process, we're missing something. And that astrologers don't need more technique. What they need to do is to purify their own mind, so that years ago, I read all the novels and short stories about all of them of Franz Kafka. And I also read his diaries. And in his diaries was a single line that stuck in my mind. Like, you know how it is. Sometimes something sticks and it takes you years to figure out. And this was the line. He said, each word that I write, it already has perfection. And what he meant by that was that instead of going and trying to become a writer and learn to write really well, instead of doing that, what he did was work on purifying his mind so that everything he did, thought, word, and deed, carried the stamp of the purified mind. And I think that's a different approach that most people don't understand is open to us.
Right, but who's the arbiter? Who says when the mind is pure? How do we know when we've reached that point?
You know it when you recognize the nature of your own mind. And you would have to be the one, right? But if you still, if you have a wonderful, like I used to go to my Dharma teacher, and I would tell him all of the different kind of spiritual experiences that I had, the little visions and the stuff that all of us have. And he would always say to me, Michael, those are just experiences. That's not realization. Just keep practicing. Forget about those. And that was pretty hard to take because those were all I had. Those were everything that was important to me was different kinds of spiritual openings of one kind or another. But he was sort of saying, those are experiences. They come, but 2 weeks later, they're gone, and you're trying to wish they came back. You're trying to reinvent them or make them happen again. What he points out, let me finish the sentence. But what he's pointing out is that realization, as the Buddhists call it, is not that. The realization is the realization of experiences, which is something that never leaves you once you have it. It's not something that comes and goes.
Right. Well, the experiences are building blocks that give you a sense of context. They certainly help to be foundational in that regard. You can't deny that, right?
No, but they're only useful to the degree you realize what they mean.
Right. But
if you realize you just have experiences, I really felt great 2 weeks ago, and felt like God. And today I'm trying to pay my bills. I don't feel that at all today. I wish it came back. All I can think about is how great that was. That's not very helpful.
Well, that is, you could also argue that's based on in your personal transits and where your moon is and how you feel.
Well, yeah, well, yes, you can link it to astrology, but you're not going to get very far unless the mind is clear enough how to link it properly.
Mm-hmm. And of course, time is a continuum. It's always moving on. We're like a giant corkscrew where the time is going around and around in circles, and we're just down the road, a different place in time.
In spirals, right?
Spirals, yeah. It's like the DNA, the corkscrew, where you're going around and around. This is how we.
Yeah, I understand. I agree.
Mm-hmm. When you think about astrology in that regard, in a very pure form, in many ways, we could never ever say that because Uranus is in Taurus, as it was 84 years ago, that we're going to have X is going to happen, because it's not the same context. So it's always moving forward. So it's always going to be fluid and always going to be dynamic.
Right, but we can look. I was born with Uranus in Taurus, and I was born with Uranus trine Neptune, just like Bob Dylan was. He and I were born a month apart or so. Yes, but we can talk about what is a trine, Uranus Neptune trine. What is that? That's a specific astronomical event, and our job would be to, as astrologers in cultural astronomy, is, well, what does that mean? Can we agree on what that means? And I'm not sure that we can at this point.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, Uranus Neptune trine to me would be a person exactly like Bob Dylan, person who dealt in.
Well, apparently, it can be, right?
Right, and if you have the same aspect, you must have a similar characteristic in yourself, as I believe you do.
Well, I've done a lot with music, but then it's getting very different.
Right.
But even so, whatever I am, or you are, what really is important is our ability to realize it as enough for us to be satisfied, to us to rest in that and just be it. And that's not such an easy thing, the whole be here now, that kind of stuff.
Oh, it's very difficult. That is, I mean, you must, I think people wrestle with that all their lives, no matter how well versed they are in Buddhism or their meditation practice. I don't think you ever really achieve it. I mean, do you think you really ever get to a place where you're like, oh, okay, I'm here?
Because these things aren't states.
Mm-hmm.
There's no heaven. They're all processes. They're like breathing. We can't stop breathing as long as we live. It's the same with realization. Realization is a process, not a state that we get to. That process has to be kept going, just like we have to keep breathing.
Mm-hmm. And realization to you is defined as being in the present, being aware.
Realizing the nature of the mind itself, not just who we are about ourselves, but realizing being one with the mind itself, being able to rest in the mind itself. Non-dualistic, right?
Mm-hmm. And how would you describe that feeling? I mean, what is it like to be in the mind in itself? I mean, is that to be in a state of complete blank? Is it a clear slate, a tabula rasa?
No, I don't think it's anything like that. I think it's realization. Let's just talk about realization for a second. Mm-hmm. If I show you how to turn a light switch on, and you realize what I did, and you can do it, you're never going to forget. You only have to be shown it once. And for the rest of your life, you can turn that switch on and off because you've realized how to do it. But realizing the nature of the mind itself is a little more complicated for us to turn. But it's the same principle. It's like they used to have, I don't see so many anymore. There used to be like paintings that were called figure ground paintings, where that in one painting was another image that you couldn't see unless someone pointed it out to you.
Right.
Once you saw it, then you could always see it. Realization is like that you're looking at the mind and you don't see the nature of it. You don't understand how it works. The moment that you do, you will always know how it works, and it gives you a certain confidence that you never had and could never find because you were just looking for something that was satisfying, that was like that.
Have you achieved that yourself?
I'm not saying I achieved it. I think that I've had glimpses of what this is, and the whole idea of realization is that whatever little bits you have, you don't let it lie fallow. You have to continue to extend it and to expand it. Otherwise, it just becomes kind of dormant. It doesn't really go away, but this is my whole point, is it's not a state. It's an endless process. And that once you get on the road of process where you understand that, then every day is a little better than the one before. Every day is a little more clear. That is really worth doing. And yeah, I've done some of that. And that's, totally useful. That's what I say, is that it makes life worthwhile.
Right. I think I see your point clearly. When you look at your own personal chart, if you do you see this, character trait in your own personal life? I mean,
Which trait?
well, sort of the ability to be a Buddhist, to be a here and now person. Do you think that's evident in you, or is that something that came to
No,
you?
no, it's absolutely evident in my chart.
It is.
Absolutely. So remember that we have more than one chart. We have a series of charts. This is one of the problems with astrology. The astrologers have only a single chart that they look at, and it's been the same one for thousands of years, however long astrology goes back. It's basically a chart based on the Earth, looking at the solar system and taking a snapshot at our birth of the solar system. But because the Earth is so close to the sun and moving so fast relatively, that picture of the solar system is not often accurate. The solar system, for instance, that my Mars is in Aries in the traditional chart, but really in the solar system it was in tropical Aquarius at the time I was born. So that's a big difference. This is what's hurting astrologers. Astronomers walked away with both charts, so they could use both charts and they kind of triangulate who you are. And there's other charts like what I call local space, which is azimuth and altitude. It's the space surrounding our birth. Like if your dad walked outside with you in his arms and he saw Venus in the sky, it would be in a certain direction and would be in a certain heavenly direction in conjunction with a star, but it might also run through a whole series of cities on the Earth. It makes in a great circle. Mm-hmm. These are all different ways of looking at the same planets in the same birth moment. And you can use those charts together to get a more and more three-dimensional idea of just who are you and what are you here for? What can you be good at doing? And I call the traditional chart that astrologers use the karma chart. It's a chart of our personality and the circumstances in which we were born. But I call the heliocentric chart our dharma chart because it shows the path that we must take in order to realize ourselves. And that's the answer to your question, is that helio chart, I can see exactly the nature of how I have to do it.
Right. When it comes to the question of, say, twins, or anybody born at the same place and time, and character traits, how do you think that rationalizes itself? I mean, granted, you can take two people born at the same, minutes apart or whatever. They're going to have very similar charts, obviously. But then experience molds them into ways which gives them distinct character. But are they delineated through the reading of the charts, do you think?
Remember, the astrology is just going to give us an astrological notation of what we are. But what I mentioned before with the Laya Vijnana and the Vasanas, the karmic traces that are coming from two different lives. So even if they're born a second apart, they carry very, very different karma.
Interesting.
So, I mean, that's... Yeah, trying to figure out that twins born, how many seconds apart before they could be different. I think that's just a false premise.
Okay, that's interesting to get your view on that. Well, we've sort of had a good conversation here. We rambled around, which is fine with me. I have no problem with that. I love listening to you talk. I'm curious, what would you say if given your experience in your pivotal role in the world of astrology, you're a giant figure in that world, and your understanding of Buddhism, what do you think is lacking, or what do we need for us to move astrology forward? What are your views on that?
I think we talked about that. We don't need more technique. What we need is the quality of the mind of astrologers to become at a higher level. Mm-hmm. And that if they're not more aware, they're not going to be able to really help other people. I can give you just a way of the way it was taught to me by, the Tibetans use astrology a lot. And what my Tibetan teacher said to me, because I was constantly bugging him about astrology, you can imagine. And he said, Michael, he says, astrology is one of the limbs of the yoga. It is, but it's not the root. And the way he was explaining that is the way I explain to students when I teach it, is that it's like a sphere. Imagine a sphere covered with water like the earth. And, there's winds blowing and stuff like that. And on that sphere is a little sailboat. Astrologers can help you take that sailboat and set the sails so that you can get out of wherever you are into a much better place. anywhere on the globe. That's the power of astrology. But what it can't do, it can't take you to the center of the sphere. Only the Dharma can do that. And so that, as wonderful as astrology is, and you and I probably know that it is wonderful, and certainly to me, I've spent almost 60 years studying it. It's like, it still has the downside. It's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It makes us more comfortable in the samsaric world we live in. It's never going to, let me finish. It's never going to bring realization. It's only going to help us be more comfortable, which is a good thing. But it's not a form of realization.
No, I see that. I think that they're different. I mean, you're sort of saying, well, this is how it is right now. So just live and, buck up and bear through it, and you'll be done in a month or two when the aspects are changing.
No, I'm saying if you set the sails in whatever way astrologer can be skilled at, I can get you out of this. I can get you into, in a month, but it's not, I don't think it's just waiting for something to happen, like waiting for an aspect to roll around. I think we have to actively set our sails and sail right out of it through our actions. But I say, no matter how far we sail and wherever we get, we're only going to be more comfortable. It's like we're still going to die. Mm-hmm. We can just die more comfortably.
Right, or at least with less thought involved. Well, we've run out of time, and I do appreciate your time today talking about this. It's a fascinating topic. My guest today has been Michael Erlewine. He's the pioneer, the founding father of bringing computers and astrology together. His first program was Matrix Software, which went on to become a very popular program on work on PCs at least, and as well, and is also a notable astrologer in his own right. Has written thousands of pages. What is your best website for people to get to you for, Michael?
Yeah, people can reach me at spiritgrooves.net or .com. Spirit Grooves, one word. Just spirit groovy, like grooves. Mm-hmm. Spiritgrooves.net, and I have lots and lots of free videos and free ebooks, hundreds of free ebooks that you can just have for free.
Yeah, it's just incredible stuff. I mean, it's a treasure map of treasure trove of information and great wisdom. And so I do appreciate you very much taking the time to talk today on the show, Turning of the Wheel. So thank you very much, Michael. And it's been great to speak with you. And I do appreciate your time.
Okay, so we're off. We can still talk a second.
We can say, yeah. I mean, as long as
okay. What I've got to do is stop the recording thing, make sure it's okay. Then I have to see. I'll try to email it to you unless it's too large, in which case I have to use Dropbox.
Yeah, that's okay.
And but to use Dropbox, I would need you to send me an email with your email address on it. Don't just post it here, but send it because it's on another computer.
Yeah, no, I will. And your email is
Michael@Erlewine.net.
Michael at Erlewine? Okay.
Yep, Erlewine.net.
Okay, .net. Okay.
So if you send that to me, I will either get it to you directly or I'll arrange for you to pick it up on Dropbox.
That's great. Before you go, I also think, aren't you responsible for All Music as well?
Yeah, I also founded All Music Guide, the All Movie Guide, the classic posters. I'm an expert in rock and roll posters and the largest music database in the world.
Yeah, I love All Music. I turn to it all the time to get an idea of what's going on, and because I'm a big music fan. I wrote for years as an independent journalist about music, and so I always turn to that because it just answers so many questions. It's just a wonderful.
Well, you can thank me for creating that. I did.
Yeah, I do. I'm thanking you right now.
I know. I'm just teasing you.
It's an amazing. I love All Music. I've been subscribed to ever since it first came out because I've always loved it. It's a great asset for anybody who wants to find out what's going on.
It's cool.
It's very cool. I love it. Anyway, well, thanks, Michael. I'll send you an email to michael@erlewine.net with my email address. It's just cflisher@gmail, but I'll write that off to you and send it to you. And then you can
send it to me. Make it easier for me.
All right. That's great. It's been great talking to you. Thanks very much.
Okay. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny. and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
Hi, your host, Chris Flisher here. I've been producer and host of this podcast and radio show for the past 10 years. My goal has always been to provide enlightening, progressive, and logical discussions about where we are as a species and how we move ourselves further down the road towards our greater potential. I believe astrology provides a great tool for observing our progress and awakening our consciousness to becoming a whole, better, and more complete individuals. I have sought to invite the best contemporary guests, thought leaders, and progressive minds to discuss topics that concern us all, regardless of your beliefs. Consider making a contribution through PayPal to help keep the great wheel turning so that I can continue for the next 10 years along the same enlightened path. As always, I thank you for your support. You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.